I hereby call to order the Village of Riverside Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting for Wednesday, September 27th, 2023. And could you please call the roll?
Commissioner Pelletier?
Here.
Commissioner Marhol?
Here.
Commissioner Miller?
Here.
Commissioner Braun?
Here.
Chairperson Hennigan?
Here. We have a quorum. Also in attendance this evening is our village attorney, Mr. Pickerel. The first item of business is approval of minutes for the Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting minutes of August 23rd, 2023. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Does anyone have any changes to the minutes? Hearing none. Ann, please call the roll.
Commissioner Pelletier?
Aye.
Commissioner Marhol?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Braun?
Aye.
Chairperson Hennigan?
Aye. Motion's approved. Next up, is there a motion to approve the Planning and Zoning Commission special meeting minutes of September 15th, 2023?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Any changes to the minutes? Hearing none, can you call the roll?
Commissioner Pelletier?
Aye.
Commissioner Marhol?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner Braun?
Aye.
Chairperson Hennigan?
Aye. Motion passes. Next, is there anyone present who would like to speak during this time about an item that is not on the agenda tonight? Okay. In that case, Ann, can you please provide the village board update?
Yes, thank you. On September 21st, the Village Board reviewed the front porch amendments for the R3 district and supported the PZC's recommendation. The public hearing to consider those amendments will be on the agenda of the October 25th Commission meeting. The board also reviewed the Commission's comments regarding temporary signs and requested additional consideration of the standards specifically for feather flags. That item will also be on the October 25th agenda. At the September 21st meeting, the board approved the variation for the landscape buffer in the proposed parking lot at 2710 South Harlem Avenue.
Thank you very much. This brings us to new business. First item is PZ 23-0007, rezoning for 28 East Burlington Street. This is a public hearing to consider an application from Lion Development 2 LLC to amend the official zoning map of the Village of Riverside. The zoning map amendment sought would amend the official zoning map of the village to rezone parcel 15-36-109-079-0000 from the R1A district to the to the B2 RC subdistrict. Is there a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. The notice of the public hearing was published in the Landmark on September 6, 2023, and will be marked as an exhibit. The remaining application materials will be marked as a second exhibit. Is there a motion to accept these exhibits?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. All right, at this point, anyone who would like to give testimony, including the petitioner or anyone who plans to ask any questions or speak during the meeting, we could swear you in. So if you please raise your right hand. And say, do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is true to the best of your knowledge? So say, I do. I do. Thank you very much. And now, Ann, could you please provide the staff report?
Yes, I will. Thank you. And I just want to first confirm that the notices were published and delivered in conformance with state law and the village code. And a note that John Maja with Studio 222 Architects and Aaron Bruder with Cage Civil Engineering are here tonight to present the application on behalf of the applicant and answer questions. This is the first of two items on tonight's agenda related to the proposed mixed-use building at 28 and 30 East Burlington Street. This application is to rezone parcel 79 from the R1A district to the B2 RC subdistrict, so that all four parcels involved with the project are in that B2 RC subdistrict. The subject parcel is currently vacant, but it previously served as a parking lot for the adjacent doctor's office. In the proposed development, the parcel would be developed with a surface parking lot with 11 parking spaces. The purpose and intent statements for the two zoning districts are included in the staff memo. The R1A district is meant to preserve single-family residential areas, while the B2 RC subdistrict is meant to be a pedestrian-friendly business district. Excuse me. The staff memo includes a summary of the standards for zoning map amendments and an analysis of each standard for this application. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about any of those. The standards for development will not be different if the property is rezoned, with one exception. A parking lot in the R1A district requires a special use approval. The other result of the rezoning would be that the Preservation Commission does not need to review the planned unit development application, since the commission's jurisdiction doesn't extend to the business districts. The village received an email and a letter from neighboring property owners objecting to the proposed development, and you can see those in attachment F. Those are the last 2 pages in the packet. We didn't receive any other feedback on the application. The standards for a zoning map amendment are in attachment E on page 38 of the packet. And just a note, the village board will consider this application and the application for a PUD along with the commission's recommendations during an upcoming meeting. So those are the next steps after this. Unless you have any specific questions for me, I'll turn it over to John and Aaron.
Do we know when that garage was originally built?
When it was originally built, I don't know that date.
And I don't have anything additional on this item. I think it would be maybe best if we just discuss the project as a whole, I think, because the rezoning is kind of dependent on what happens in, I guess, the second item number 3 on the agenda.
Okay,
If that's
it's up to
okay.
you. We just
Yeah.
need to make sure there are 2 votes. So we'll vote on the rezoning and then we'll vote on
Okay,
the planning and
okay,
development.
so
just-
I'll describe the project then.
Sure.
And then we can go to both of those.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you, commissioners. My name is John Medea. You guys, everyone looks familiar. I think I've seen you last time I was here when we did the informal project introduction to get feedback from you guys. So I'll just jump into, I won't go into detail about the project, but I'll just describe it for the benefit of everyone that's here today that didn't see it last time. So the project in question is located at 28 to 30 East Burlington Street in Riverside, which is in the Central Business District. And I just have the site plan here. I think in your packets, I have kind of an overall a plan that shows the different business districts. But this is the Central Business District, and then along the back at the curve is the R1A single-family residential district. The project is for a 5-story mixed-use building that would include apartments with ground floor live-work units at the front, and then a parking garage that would be actually indoor with parking spaces along the back, kind of supporting the development. The project, as Ann mentioned, combines 4 parcels that are on the lot. 3 of them face Burlington, and then the one residential property that we're asking to be rezoned has no access to any street. It's, like we said, there's no, I guess, standards that are different between the business district zoning and the residential zoning. We're just trying to simplify the process and give the property owner kind of a single pin to easier kind of manage the entire site. So just a little overview of kind of the ground floor. We would be improving the sidewalk at the front. Right now, I believe this is the only portion that's accessible to the public, and then there's a little bit of landscape area at the front. We would set the building back in line with the corner building and provide additional public sidewalk at the front of the building. The drive would be kind of a one-way drive around the building where you could access parking spaces at the back with a loading zone, or you can also go inside the parking garage itself. Couple changes from, I think, when we presented last time is we added a loading zone at the back that would serve, obviously, anyone moving in, moving out. And also, we increased the permeable paver area in the parking garage before we, or at the parking lot. Before we just had it at the parking spaces, we added the entire drive aisle at the back. As far as some of the stats, we have 15 at-grade parking spaces, and then there's 19 indoor parking spaces. We're providing 2 outdoor EV charging stations and then also 2 indoor EV charging stations. A little bit on the landscape, the plan that the site plan that you see is not completely representative of the actual landscape that's planned. If you open the L.2 landscape drawing, that shows all the species and the number of plants. This is more to represent kind of the intent of what we're trying to achieve. So we are providing a fence along the entire back property facing the residential. It would be a 6-foot tall fence, along with tall hedges that would also help to screen the parking and provide a buffer between residential and this development. We also have the new curb planters in the front, and all the plantings in the back and the front would be just kind of native perennial that would reduce kind of need for irrigation and also kind of fit within the kind of sustainable initiative that we're trying to achieve. There's also a plan for a pollinator garden. We looked at doing kind of a bioswale that would help with the water detention, but just the area is so small that I think it's going to be difficult to achieve. And Aaron can speak to that if there's any questions in that. But we are providing, those perennial native plants and also kind of a pollinator garden, if you'd say, along the back. And again, I think one of the things I mentioned maybe is that the front would match the design of what's going on to the west at the corner. So all the sidewalks would match. If I can jump into the building itself, it would, as I mentioned before, it will be a 5-story luxury apartment building. It will have 22 residential units, and they will consist of 1, 2, and 3/4 bedroom units. All the units will have 9-foot ceilings, stainless steel appliances, quartz countertops, in-unit washer dryers, individual controls for HVAC, walk-in showers, kind of very consistent with what's seen in today's kind of luxury apartment market. So it's not kind of what I think some may have a perception of what apartments are. These are close match what you might do in your own home. I mentioned the indoor parking. We also have bike storage, and then the ground floor of these 2 spaces here are intended to be the work units, which I can touch on a little bit later. Another change from last time is that we added green roof on the 5th floor terraces. So if you have the exhibits in front of you on 1.2, I would say about 1/3 to 1/2 of the terraces that were there before. We're intending to have a kind of a sedum tray system. Again, that will help with water infiltration and kind of reduce heat island effect. I'll switch the boards to the building kind of design itself. I think last time you saw the form of the building hasn't changed, but we tried to incorporate some of the comments. I think one of them was, I think that maybe the dark brick was a little bit stark, so we changed the color of the brick to fit more in a context of the area. And I would say the building kind of design is meant to complement the surrounding area without kind of copying any architectural style that's already here. And we're doing that by incorporating a lot of the kind of classic building designs, having a definite base to the building, which brings down scale and is more pedestrian friendly. And then your middle of the building, which is kind of the majority of it, and then a top with a setback terrace in this case, and a cornice. So we're using kind of a variety of languages to break the scale down. As I mentioned, we have a definite base. There's articulation in the facade where it moves back and forth. It's not a flat facade. And then to further reduce the building scale, we set the terrace back on the 5th floor on one portion of the building. I don't have the elevations, but on the backside, the terrace is set back on 3 sides, all the way back. So this is the only corner that's a true 5-story view from the front. The rest of the building is set back. Again, I think we discussed this last time, but all the windows will be operable fiberglass windows. The ground floor would be more of a storefront system that would match the design up on top. So I think I touched on a lot of this, but I want to just go back and mention kind of the sustainable initiatives that we're aiming to achieve in this building. And obviously, I mentioned the EV charging stations, so we'll have 4 of them. We're trying to reduce the impervious area on the site, so we're using the permeable pavers to reduce runoff, as well as the green roof that I mentioned. The native perennials reduce heat island effect and also the need for irrigation. Green roof, again, I mentioned, reduce the heat island effect. The owner is considering, and we're not into obviously this is conceptual, we're not into the design of the building, but he's considering doing an all-electric building where the heating and also cooking appliances would be all electric. Kind of consistent with the transit-oriented development, we have bicycle parking or spaces inside for bicycles. Obviously, we're reducing dependence on cars, which goes in line with the live-work units that we're proposing on the ground floor. We have separate trash and recycling chutes, so that would make it easy to promote recycling. And also, we're not seeking to get this building LEED, but we are providing some of the items that you might do if you were pursuing LEED, such as low flow plumbing fixtures. Obviously, where proximity to transportation is a big component of LEED, which where the site is situated lends itself well. Again, recycled materials, low VOC materials, energy efficient appliances, and LED lighting. And then lastly, I'd like to touch on some of the public benefits that I think this project would provide. Obviously, there's additional tax revenue, real estate tax revenue. It kind of fills a need for a high-quality rental stock in the area, especially in the central business districts. I don't believe there's any new apartments being built, so I think that's something to consider where the building will promote new growth. New public infrastructure, which I mentioned is the sidewalk in the front that would include enhanced landscaping, seating area. And then obviously the live-work units, which reduce commute time and provide convenience to someone who wants to work from home, but they don't want to commute. And again, it reduces dependence on cars. And kind of, the lots have been sitting empty, so this is kind of a way to revitalize land that might have been underutilized. And of course, you would have new residents potentially that would support local businesses. And as I mentioned, the green sustainable infrastructures, and also it fits with the long-term kind of central business district plan and kind of the need for more multifamily residential. So that's all I had. I'm not sure, the two items that I'd like to bring also to a vote is, one is we would request a special use for the live-work units to be considered residential units if they're not leasing. So that would be a special use. And then I'm not sure, the other request would be to use them as just plain commercial space. So not live-work units, but if someone comes in and say, hey, I want to put a sandwich shop or something, that we would be allowed to do that without coming back and asking for permission. And I think with the request for using the ground floor spaces as commercial use, there was a requirement for a knee wall and also clear glass in the ground floor units, which we would comply with that if the request is granted. So that's all I have. Like I said, I'm open to questions, and Aaron as well. So we'll just open it up.
Yes, if I could speak.
First, we need to have questions from the commissioners before we open up to the public. Thank you. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for the petitioner?
Can you repeat the two items that you wanted us to consider in addition to, for special use, those two additional items? Can you repeat them?
Yeah.
I understand the commercial space. What was your first one?
The other one was to a special use for the live-work units that are on the ground floor to be just strictly residential.
Okay.
Meaning if someone just wanted to live there without having a work component attached to it or an office component attached to it.
So they both have to do with the lower floor?
Just the two ground floor, yeah. Just
Okay.
the two ground floor spaces. Yeah, just these two.
Thank you.
Yes.
So to clarify, you're just looking for the flexibility to have them be residential, commercial, or live-work
Or,
units?
exactly, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
There was some discussion in the packet about a utility easement and something to do with a rear utility easement, and I didn't really understand it, so can you, as the petitioner, explain that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of a utility easement. I know there are power lines that feed the adjacent properties, which those would remain. We worked the parking around where the poles are, and those would remain.
Yeah, and I'll tack onto that. Aaron Bruder, I'm the civil engineer for the project with Cage Engineering. In the research we've done to date, we haven't identified any existing easement, but like John mentioned, there is existing utility infrastructure there that would stay in place. If there are any other additional underground items in that, it would be on us to relocate them and make sure that they're maintained to whatever users that they're serving.
And also, there was something in the packet regarding, I believe, just some land easements or something to do with the adjacent property. Can you touch on those?
Yeah, so there was a cross easement agreement, I believe, between what was the church and our property, but that's been vacated to my understanding, or recently has been vacated. So there's no cross easement agreements between, I guess, the adjacent properties at this point.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
okay, so there will be no easements involved between the adjoining property and, as far as you know?
No.
May I ask what research was done to determine that there are no underground utilities in the lot that you want to rezone?
Yeah, we've had topographic surveyors go out there and perform private utility locates, and nothing was identified underground based on what they were looking at.
Any other questions from the commission?
Point of clarification, the utility locates, you just did a standard Julie?
Correct.
And one of the changes you made from the previous was to change the size of the outside parking stalls from 8.5 to 9. And I recognize that you also then made most of those parking areas permeable pavers. What was the idea behind making the spaces wider?
I think they're, I'm not sure, I think they're only wider in this parking space. I think it's just because we had the room there. As far as the additional permeable pavers, I believe that had to do with just stormwater management.
Yeah,
And Aaron can speak to that.
Yeah, just given that the parcel size is greater than a half acre, we're subject to the runoff volume control requirements of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. And as we were looking at just what really functional space there was on the site to locate stormwater management infrastructure, I know that there was some discussion of bioswales being around the outside of the site, and that's something that we looked into to be able to provide that stormwater volume and quality reduction. But as it turns out, the rear lots there that would be landscaped are actually higher than the rest of the site. It kind of drains closer towards down towards the right of way. So when we're addressing that grade and figuring out how low we would need to get for that area to hold water and treat it in a way that doesn't back up into the building or the garage space, it takes up almost the entire space that we had there. So that was why we were looking at, okay, let's find more opportunities to use some of these green infrastructure practices, incorporating the green roof, expanding the limits of the permeable pavers, so we provide that same level of water quality and quantity reduction that is, mandated by MWRD, and obviously a sustainable practice that we want to make sure we're following along with.
Right. Mostly my question is more, why make the spaces wider and then force yourselves into more permeable pavers? Why not stick with additional green space?
Yeah, I guess there's, I'm not sure if there is a stormwater benefit if we're reducing those parking spaces, if that's like a negligible amount. Or
Yeah, it probably is 6 of one, half dozen of the other, but, just from a stormwater perspective and kind of lot coverage, I suppose, we figured let's, assess a comfortable level of landscape screening around the parking lot there, and then just use the additional space to provide comfort for vehicular drivers. 6 inches isn't all that much, but 9 feet is going to be the most common parking stall width, and just we don't want people bumping doors against each other and whatever that may come up.
If you had switched the parking spaces layout to diagonal parking, how many spaces did you look at that? How many spaces could you get into that?
We did,
square?
and going diagonal in that area really wouldn't provide much of any. It actually would reduce a good amount of spaces, and
That's what I'm wondering, would it reduce? the
yeah,
number of-
it would reduce it probably by close to half, and it would result in just a challenge for people pulling all the way in and then having to back all the way out, because they wouldn't have space to, kind of turn around 180 degrees cleanly to
Okay, all right.
egress from the site.
And I have another question regarding the drive lanes. What is the width on the street of the lot?
The driveways?
The width of the whole series of lots you have, what is that, 1, 2, and 4? If the whole parcel, how wide is
Let's
that?
see, like in the 4 plus 30, 125, I believe. I think that was the
I believe
Yeah.
that's right.
It's 124 on your survey.
Okay. Yeah.
So, I think I read something in the code about if you have a lot that's less than 150 feet linear width, that you should try and limit curb cuts. So that made me think, I don't know if these properties are in common ownership, but did you look at the concept of having a drive lane from Long Common behind the Village Center building and going over to here and have one of your access points, and then only have one driveway coming out onto Burlington? And in that way, perhaps also providing, more of a setback, more green space, et cetera. Was that looked at?
We haven't looked at access from back because I think that gets into cross easement agreements. And I know we did ask Pat about, can we share the drive that's already at the condo building to the west? And just because it's a condo association, he was having a hard time just getting enough momentum for people to agree to it because you have, 15, 20 owners versus just one. So he inquired about it, but I don't think there was any, desire from the condo building owners to actually share the drive between the two buildings.
Okay, all right.
Are you decreasing the runoff that comes off of the site? I know you're meeting MWRD, but does that decrease from what the existing is?
It does, yes. When we consider the storage that's provided in the permeable pavers and the green roof, the total stormwater demand on the site is being decreased.
Do you know by what percent, or?
I have that here. By approximately 5 to 10%.
And those overhead utilities that are serving the neighbors, would you consider putting those underground? Is that?
It's something that we definitely consider. It would involve coordination with whatever public utilities those are, whether it's ComEd or other telecommunications companies. We haven't gotten to that level of discussion yet, but it's something that we would consider, and just would have to be careful with where that ends up with landscaping going around, and if it's something that would be an impact to the permeable pavers in the lot. We can consider it. There's nothing prohibitive to it.
Okay. Okay.
You said you had predicted a 5 to 10% reduction in stormwater runoff?
Correct.
With this project compared to current state?
Yes.
And someone in the project have experience with green roofs and have any success stories to point to with installing these green roofs?
We've done one building that installed these green roof trays on it, and they seem to be holding up.
And how long has that been installed?
It was installed, probably 5 years now.
Okay.
I think the benefit here is that they're actually on a terrace, so you would have, I think, more of a, an incentive for someone living there to actually maintain them. Sometimes when you put them on a roof, you kind of forget them, and you're dependent on rain or whatever. The sedums are made to be kind of drought resistant, and they're picked for the specific climate and location on the building. But obviously weeds can start growing, birds starts dropping things. So there is some maintenance. You want to pull the weeds out, and I think here, because there will be people living and actually looking out on the green roof themselves, I think there is a benefit to that where I think it would get maintained more than a typical green roof would.
Right.
Yeah, and especially with the modularity of the
Yeah.
type of tray system, they almost come ready to delivered to the site. Just, hey, here it is, put it where you need it to
They're
be.
pre-grown, they're pre-grown. You don't have to wait a year for them to establish.
Yeah.
And this is a small point, I know, but I'm just curious. So what if we have a deluge of rain and the sedum are totally swamped with water? There will be a way to drain properly, just as if it was in a garden, those trays?
The trays are obviously made to drain, so they wouldn't necessarily hold water. They would only hold water to the saturation of the soil, and then the rest of the water release,
Would
and then
release.
drain.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And then for the pavers that you have, the permeable pavers, the base below that is just the typical gravel base and?
Yep, typical 3/4 inch stone. I think we were planning for a depth of, what did we have on those? A 16-inch depth for storage purposes. So that 16-inch layer of gravel would be capped by your typical finer sand for the pavers to be set on.
Okay. And do you know, for the parcel that you have, are you receiving any water from neighboring properties?
So the limits that we've identified on the topographic survey, which only extended, I don't know, just a typical 5 to 10 feet over the property limits, some of those rear residences do drain onto us. And kind of gets to what I was saying about earlier with kind of the limitations of a bioswale in that rear landscaping area. But that's really it. Everything else does kind of drain out towards the public right-of-way.
Okay. And the bioswale would be adjacent to one of the properties in the rear, and there'd be a way for the water to come through the fence, or would not? There would be a curb back there that would prevent the water from coming
So
onto your property?
the way that we have it designed right now is that that whole native planting area would drain over the curb and onto the permeable paver surfaces, and that's where it would kind of be collected and dropping down. The point there with bioswales and looking at that was just that we didn't have enough space to carve those out so that they would be low enough that we could hold the water there without it backing up into the building. So there's not going to be a specific bioswale, but there will still be native plant materials that allow that water to be filtered and cleaned out a little bit before it makes its way into the permeable paver system and eventually, either infiltrated into the ground or piped off-site.
So there'll be some way for the water in the bioswale to infiltrate further into subsurface?
Yeah,
That's
through
the
that
plan.
would be through the permeable paver base.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. And then you're saying that you won't be preventing water from flowing from the rear property? the
Correct.
property to the rear, you're not-
We're planning for that to be still cascading onto our site. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but we're not blocking drainage to any other
All right.
properties.
And then I had one other question for the architect. The small apartments, the 750 square foot apartments, was that a change from last time you came before us?
Let me see. I
Or did I
don't
just not
believe so. I would have to go back and check. I know the one change was on the penthouse level. There used to be one unit, now there's two.
Okay.
But I would have to go back and check the lower units, but I believe we changed it, maybe for a few square feet, but I don't think it went from like 1,000 to 750.
Okay. Is that, Planner Siren, is that pretty accurate?
That's accurate. They were the same, approximately the same size as before, but we didn't consider the size as part of one of the exceptions because they were still finalizing the floor plans. So we didn't want to say this will necessarily be something that they need an exemption from until we knew for sure. Now we know they'll need the exemption.
Can you just describe for me a little bit about the fifth floor? You said that there are now 2 penthouse units?
Yeah, I'm not su-
I think I read in the materials that there's also access for the 4th floor to get to the 5th floor. Is that true, or did I read that wrong?
No, I think we just split the top floor unit into 2, so there'd be a 3-bedroom unit and a 4-bedroom unit on the top floor. And, there'd be shared elevator and mechanical space, and then obviously we have to connect to so there would be now a common corridor where before you would just access from the elevator directly to someone's like foyer or lobby basically on their unit, but now there would be 2 separate units there, yeah.
I have an additional question about the terrace, or the top ones. Again, with the sedums and all the rest. Since this would be an apartment building, what would be sort of the obligation of the owner of the building compared to the tenant who's simply living there if they don't care for the green roofs?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a management company that would manage the building, and I think they would take care of it if someone is like, okay, I don't want to be looking at this or maintaining this thing. Yeah,
Okay.
there would be a management company. It's not like they would just be left to, and, if it goes crazy overgrown with weeds, like, who would want to rent that apartment? So
Yeah,
I think
right.
they would probably keep it pretty neat. The management company, they would,
Okay.
do that.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions from the commission? No? All right, so in a moment,
Sorry.
Oh, yes.
I'm so sorry. Chairperson Hennigan, I just wanted to note that as we have public comment, I would ask everyone who wants to speak to go to the podium to speak, state their name and address, and please speak into the microphone because we can all hear you here in the room, but obviously we're filming this meeting and we want everyone who watches the video to hear everything that you have to say. Thank you very much.
yeah, so in a few moments, we'll have the opportunity for people to speak sort of freely and give your opinions on the project. But right now, before we get to that, does anyone have any questions for the petitioner while they're up there? If you could come to the podium, please.
Sure, my name is Stephen Rotuno, live at 10 East Burlington Street, Unit 4D, which is the condo building immediately to the west of this proposed monstrosity. A couple of questions. How many units are there going to be in the building? You gave a lot of facts here, but I don't think anybody knows how many units there are.
22.
And does that include the first floor live-in units?
Yeah.
So total 5 floors, 22 units. What's the average square foot of each unit?
The one-bedroom units are approximately 900 square feet, 999 square feet. Two bedrooms, almost 1,400. And four bedrooms are 2,400. And then the live-work units are about 1,200.
Well, where did the 750? Is that-
John, could you,
There's one unit that's smaller
Okay.
versus, so the average, it averages out to be much higher because there isn't a lot of units in the building.
What?
I'm sorry, John, as you answer the questions, could you step up so we can hear
Oh,
you in the
I'm sorry.
microphone? Thank you very
You
much.
want me to repeat?
I think we're good,
Okay.
but moving
Okay,
forward,
I'm
if you could
sorry.
just kind of keep close to the microphone. Thank you.
What's the proposed cost per square foot for this build? For the units and the common areas?
I don't know that at this time.
Well, you said it was a high-end building. How can anybody make a determination if it's a high-end building if you don't know what the cost per
Personally, I
unit?
don't know. I'm sure
Okay.
the owner, the applicant who's not here today, he knows. I think that's a good idea.
I would make a request of the committee to make sure you find that out, to make sure, in fact, this is a high-end building. I don't have any further questions. If you want me to make my comments now, I'm happy to, or I can wait for other people to make comments.
If we could address all the questions now that people have, so then the petitioner can sit down. Thank you. Yes, please come to the podium, please.
Hi, Ann Miga, 10 East Burlington, 3F. I just had a question. I saw in the proposal that we have 20 feet from our building to their building that we own, the driveway. It looks a lot bigger here. Because this is 15 feet here, supposedly that's 20 feet. So I have a question about that. Is it actually 20 feet?
I don't know. I mean, I'm just going off the property line, so it might be, you might actually own more than it's there.
Because our garage, we have to pull in there, and then we have to make a sharp turn into our garage down, going down into our garage. So I was wondering if we just have 20 feet, or do we have more?
I think this lot, there's a little lot here that's,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it actually extends over, but it's like, it's hard to explain, but I thought it was lens, part of it is grass, but then like.
Yeah,
it's
and
shared,
then there's-
so honestly, I'm not sure. I think we're just going off what the property
Okay.
boundary is.
Okay.
So I think what we're showing is accurate in terms of the actual, now how it's being utilized currently, I'm not sure, because that could be
Okay.
different if someone, I think there's parking, that's what I'm.
Yeah, there's
I think part of
parking
it
there
might-
now.
part
And
of that-
Leone owns it, I believe.
Yeah, part of that might be parking, so that's why you're seeing only a 20-foot drive versus what's the actual property line.
I have a question, too. I have a parking spot behind the building. Let me just show you right here. So is that going to be affected by your, right now, there's a fence there, and there are some utility things right back there.
That fence would remain, there's nothing, we're not proposing anything past that property line.
And-
That fence would remain
Okay.
as is, yeah.
And also, there's a drive like that goes right behind our building. Is that going to
That
be
wouldn't be
affected at all?
affected, no.
Okay, thank you. Oh, one other question. I'm concerned about the water runoff, because if we have a lot of water runoff, we're going to start getting water in our basement. So that's not an issue for us?
Yeah, so like I was saying, when we're incorporating the different permeable surfaces in the green roof, the total amount of water that the site is generating that would be excess and kind of put on the demand of the local sewer system to hold, it's less in the proposed condition than it is now.
Okay.
So if that were to happen, it would be less likely to happen in the future than it is present day if nothing were to be done.
Hi, my name's Amy Lester. I live at 45 Long Common. I had two questions. One is, what is the setback of the fence along, you said you're putting in a fence. How far is that off the property line?
That would be, obviously on our side of the property, would run right along the property line.
Is there any kind of setback required in the code?
A fence has to be on the property line, or it has to be set back at least 3 feet from the property line. So it can be on the property line.
Okay. And then my other question is it a fact that the permeable pavers will absorb more water than the current soil that's there right now?
So they'll definitely hold more water than whatever there is now, just by nature of there being kind of designed open spaces in the gravel that's underneath them that is able to hold the water. And even if, I'm trying to think how to say this, the bottom of that gravel is directly exposed to the soil. So if that soil can absorb the water, it will do that. It'll infiltrate down in there, saturate it to the extent that it can, and free up that space in the gravel for more water to drain out into them. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Terry Gustafson. I also live at 10 East Burlington. Just 2 questions. One, if there's 44 units and conceivably 2 drivers or 2 cars, 22 units, did I say 40? That could conceivably be 44 cars. If I understood, only understood 25 planned parking spots. Where are the other 19 cars, conceivably 19 cars going to park? That's my first question. The second one, did we miss, is it already been approved that this could be 5 stories? That's no longer a variance that has to be approved? I thought we could only go 4 stories in Riverside. So those are my 2 questions.
I'll answer the parking question. I think when I said earlier, we have 19 indoor parking spaces and additional 15 outdoor spaces, so there is more than 1 parking space per unit. But I think the way a code is written, you're only required 1, just because of the nature of the development and the location. If it's considered a transit-oriented development, if it's near transportation, you get the reduction. But as it stands now, we do have more than 1 parking space per unit. And I don't know if you want to touch on the building height.
Sure, and just to confirm what John said, in the area where the building would be located, the requirement is 1 parking space per dwelling unit. So they have enough parking, they actually have more than enough parking than they're required to have.
Seeing what happens in town every day, I just don't, conceivably 19 extra cars, I don't know where those cars would park.
Sure, and I believe they could obtain a permit to park at the village lots.
Okay.
Yeah. To address your question about building height, earlier this year, the village board approved amendments to the zoning code, which states that the building could be 5 stories with a special approval. So part of the applications here tonight, we've got 2 applications. One that we're currently in is for the rezoning for the 1 parcel. The second application that we'll consider and that the commission will make a recommendation on to the board is to approve variations from what the zoning code requires normally. And it's a little technical, but it's a special use. So one of the conditions that the applicant is requesting is to have that additional height as part of this planned unit development. So that's a special use that is approved ultimately by the village board.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ed Swiderski. This is at my house right here, 37 Long Commons. So this parking lot is actually about 38 feet, I think, from my bedroom window. So I have a couple questions about the parking lot itself. So I understand that is there a requirement for the amount of spaces, or where is the number of spaces being generated from?
I think it's just the number of units and just similar size of developments and kind of what we've seen. We base the number of parking spaces on the number of units. So usually you want to have between 1.5 to 1.75 parking spaces per unit. And that's what we've seen as a demand generally, so that's, in essence, where the number of parking spaces is in this development, yeah.
Got it. Okay, so today this is zoned residential, obviously. What you don't see in this diagram is that this, along Long Common, all these parcels are all fanning out with the same pattern. This property was actually bifurcated, so there were some notes in the agenda about it's not suitable for a residential property, right? Because it doesn't have access. Well, of course it doesn't, because it was originally part of the other parcels that match the same layout as the rest of the properties around there. So it was bifurcated, I don't know when, then Pat bought it in 2017, but be clear that the reason why it is not appropriate for a residential unit is because it was bifurcated, just so we're all clear, right? The other thing is, the easement does run along there. I mean, I have utilities that run across this grass here. So I don't know who did the survey, but there's stuff in there that you guys missed for sure. Tom, who lives here, he couldn't make it tonight, brought up, the easement. He had a study done on that, and he was very familiar with that. He's the one that wrote the letter in. So I just wanted to understand the requirements for the parking. Other than the thing, to me, is pretty distracting aesthetically in terms of Riverside's character. It's just, I don't get it. I don't understand why this guy wants to do this here. I understand he's a proprietor and he's got a restaurant and all that, but like, enough's enough, right? We don't need a 5-story building here. So, and it's not just because this is my backyard, frankly. I think it's a horrible looking building. Sorry, I don't mean to, but it's just that you got to know Olmsted. You got to understand the history of our community, and it doesn't fit. That's all I have.
Any other questions? Please.
How many elevators are there? Ma'am, if you're going to ask a question, if you could just get up to the podium, please.
I'm done, Sally. Hi, my name is Mike Gustafson. I live at 10 East Burlington, 2H. And I think it's, as far as for the village, I think it would be a great, and this might be outside the scope of this conversation or so, but as far as bringing more business to the town and building from there, I mean, the downtown needs a really good shot of revenue and get going again. My question would be is that I think they're very attractive, or at least what I believe to be, and it's your job to make sure they're built right. What's this village's stand on Airbnbs? I think that's the short-term, you mentioned short-term, or these would be long-term rentals, but when you said specialty cases or so, that means that, I don't know what that means exactly, but if these would be Airbnbs where it'd be short, I mean, if they're really nice, if I'm from Germany, want to come to Chicago, it'd be a great place to be, right by their train tracks, but, is there a stance the village takes on Airbnbs, rentals, short-term rentals?
Ann, would you mind?
Sure. So the village code allows for short-term rentals in the business district. There are standards, though, to have a short-term rental, one of which is that you have to be the resident of that property. So you couldn't, for example, lease the property and then sublease it, move out and use it as an Airbnb. I'd have to look into the legal ramifications of having someone who rents a property, because these would be rentals. They wouldn't be owned by the person. So I'd have to look at the legal ramifications and talk with the village attorney about whether you could possibly live in them as a lessee and then also try to rent them out as an Airbnb. So I don't know a direct answer to your question, but generally that's what the code states.
Yeah, no, I think that there won't be a problem running them out to long-term leases, so maybe it's just nothing question, but I'm just curious about it, because a lot of villages up in the North Shore have done things like that for.
Okay.
That's all.
Does anybody else have any questions for the petitioner?
I can answer the question about the elevator. Is that okay? So
Of course.
there's going to be one elevator. Yeah.
I'm Maureen McGowan. I live at 10 East Burlington as well. And my question is related to the parking again. The term that was used that I think is questionable is that reducing dependence on cars. And so I agree with the question about where will the parking occur? If people naturally would potentially have 2 cars, we don't know if everybody would, but, so you have 22 units, and could you please repeat again how many parking units are intended? Parking
There's
spaces?
34 parking spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. 19 in the garage and then 15 the surface.
And is the garage underground or on ground?
It's at grade, yeah, it's at grade. But it would be within the building, so enclosed on all sides.
And how many units are 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 bedrooms?
So we have the 2 live-work units, then we have 6 1-bedrooms, 6 2-bedrooms, and then 8 2-bedrooms, actually 7 2-bedrooms, and then there's 6 2-bedrooms, and then there's 1 3-bedroom and 1 4-bedroom.
And which floors are the 3 and the 4 on?
Those are on the top floor.
And if it in fact is going to be 5 stories high, and the back is, as you mentioned, is 5 stories high, but the half of the front is, what is the possibility of, is the 5 stories approved? I'm still unclear on whether that's in question or not.
Sure, so that's the second application that's before us tonight. The result of that will be a recommendation from the commission to the village board, and the village board will ultimately make a decision on that in an upcoming meeting. So that has not been approved yet.
All right, so can I state that I'm opposed to 5 stories? So that will be sufficient for now. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for the petitioner? All right, thank you very much. At this time, I'm sorry.
My name is Sally Rashowski. I live at 10 East Burlington. My question is, so those outdoor spaces, does he intend to use that parking for the Labara customers?
I can't speak for the owner, but I don't believe so. I think that would be difficult for someone to be accessing the parking. It's not very convenient for them. Yeah.
Well, so at this point in time, the Labara customers park on his side of the driveway. So that's what's driving my question. So where does he intend for his overflow restaurant customers to park?
That I don't know. I can't answer for him. Yeah.
Okay. So those parking spaces are specifically designated for the tenants in this building?
Correct.
Okay. And then, so we have this driveway that goes around in a U shape. These parking spaces are the churches, right? I just want to be clear about that. This is existing, the church.
Yeah, we'd be doing a curb, I believe, Aaron, so there would be a curb all along our parking. So it's not, the intent is that you couldn't, you could jump the curb, I guess, but it's not, it's not following the rules of the.
Yeah, to the extent that we can keep people from going from our site to others, that's been incorporated.
So again, to the width of the driveway, if we see how wide the church's driveway is, which is adequate, and how yours isn't that wide.
Yeah, so our driveway, the drive aisles are narrower because it's one-way traffic. So, we're showing, I think it's actually 12 feet, 13 feet maybe back of curb to back of curb. So that's why we're showing one-way traffic. Where we have the parking spaces at the back,
we have a typical drive aisle, so someone could go into the parking spaces back out, but they would always have to circulate kind of
Right.
clockwise in that fashion.
Well, this is one way too, but anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we can't speak to how wide the other properties are. I know
I
that
understand.
they've actually reversed the flow of their parking, where either it used to go southbound there and now it goes north, or vice versa. So with some of that change, that may have contributed to kind of how that width is set up, but the width that we have right now is typical for one-way traffic.
Okay, so what is this?
Those are the indoor parking spaces. So someone driving here, there would be an overhead door, you would pull in and then park in here.
Yeah, but isn't that a basement? Isn't that?
That's not basement.
Subterranean?
No, this is at grade, yeah.
Oh.
So it's like
So
street,
it's ground floor?
ground floor enclosed parking, correct?
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Got it. I found that confusing. I really needed it. Well, I needed
I need my
a
glasses
plan.
too.
That's why John brings the big printouts.
So that's what's driving everybody's question about the water runoff. What kind of a basement is there gonna be in this building?
There's no basement. Yeah, there's no basement.
Got it. So, right now, like, what does this purple stand for? What is this?
That's just the shadow from the Google Street or Google aerial map. So the adjacent building actually is here where you see the white portion. This is just dark shadow that was cast by the,
Okay.
yeah.
And that's the existing driveway around the
Yeah, that's-
Riverside
yeah,
building.
yeah,
That's gonna
it's a little
stay
hard to
with the trash enclosure back there.
Yeah.
That's all gonna stay exactly as it is.
Yeah, that. And this. And then these are the houses?
Correct.
Yes.
First one and the second one. Well, that was for my question for
Yeah,
now.
thank
you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you to our petitioners. At this time, anyone who would like to make any comments on the proposals, welcome to come up. Again, please state your name and address, even if you've already done so. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen Rotuno, 10 East Burlington, Unit 4D. Although there was a little disjointed at last discussion, it brought up the reason why this is a 5-story building is because this developer doesn't want to put in underground parking like he did at 10 East Burlington. 10 East Burlington, we have 22 livable units. We have underground parking. It's a 4-story building. He now wants a 5-story building because he does not want to build below grade for his parking, which I think you should make him do to prevent a 5-story building. If you allow this building to be 5 stories, you've now entered a slippery slope with respect to the village code and what everybody else is going to do. Those buildings across the street are horrible looking, and they have businesses that aren't very profitable. You can make those buildings, I would love to be a developer to build it over there and build a 5-story building like is proposed here. And you're going to be very difficult to deny somebody else a 5-story building when they take down the bad buildings. And I'm saying bad because they're low, they're not very profitable businesses. There's been many challenges with those businesses. So the first thing that's objectionable is that you're going to amend this code for this one developer who simply doesn't want to dig out and do below-grade parking. If he does below-grade parking, he has a 4-story building, same as 10 East Burlington. You don't have as many issues, and you don't have issues in the future. That's the first thing, and I totally object to a board allowing the change in this village code to be accomplished. Second of all, and to tie that in, this village was built on homes in this village. The Olmsted plan, if you have one, is to have homes in this building. Rental units were not part of the Olmsted plan, was not part of the fiber of this village. This village is built on families' ownership. You're now going to have an apartment building and we don't need any more apartment buildings in this town. What we may need is upscale condo units over there, and that may not be objectionable to some people, just like they have at 10 East Burlington. So that you keep, many of the families at 10 East Burlington, including myself, are longtime residents of this village. I was here for 34 years with my family. We didn't want to leave the village. We wanted to downsize, and we found a unit at 10 East Burlington. So to allow rental property changes the whole face of Burlington. There are no other real high-rise rental buildings. There are no high-rise rental buildings on Burlington. The third thing is rental buildings cause problems. You only have to go back to maybe 2 years ago when the police caught a drug dealer in one of the rental buildings on Pine, and they asked the drug dealer, "Why did you rent in Riverside?" He said, "Oh, it's a beautiful town. I love the town. I love the people." You can bring a bad element when you have rental. I'm not suggesting that all renters provide a bad element. I'm suggesting that there's no need to allow rental on Burlington Street next to a unit that's a condominium. Ownership is the way the village creates more tax revenue. Clearly, having 22 condominium units versus rental units will bring more revenue than what you're going to charge, than what the real estate taxes will be. The last thing I want to point out is having a 5-story building, having a rental unit depreciates the value of my unit and everybody else's unit at 10 East Burlington. When we bought into that unit, there was a major fight in this town about removing Henniger's, building condominiums, et cetera. You guys, if you weren't on the board, I've lived in Riverside and North Riverside for 70 years, which luckily I just turned 70 a couple of weeks ago. I know what it is to change the makeup of an area of the town. And so it was difficult enough to get condominiums. Those proved to be unsuccessful originally, totally unsuccessful for a number of reasons. One, the prices were too high. Two, the economy. But when the prices came down, people have bought those units. You have productive units providing a lot of real estate tax revenue for this village. And you have people who want to be part of the village, owners. And I implore you to think about that when you're thinking about allowing a rental building that violates the code, has to have a special use, and is merely for the convenience of this developer because he really doesn't want to spend the money to dig out a underground parking. So I would vehemently object to having a rental unit at 28 and 30 East Burlington. Thank you.
Peggy Carey at 10 East Burlington and 4B. I agree with Steve and the fact that we do not need a 5-story building next to ours. My understanding is that when they built our building, the law was that nothing could be higher than the water tower. And I think that would be a good standard to keep, that we have nothing higher than the water tower place. It gives a significance itself in the the water tower, and is a very good guide. I just think that there's 5 stories does not need to be next to our building.
My name is Diana Castaneda Torres. I'm at 41 Long Common. So basically, this is my garage. I currently have an opening to go back and forth through the back of the garage, which will be sealed off, apparently, with this new plan. We're also new to Riverside. I lived here when I was younger, went away, but came back to Riverside because I love the town. And to see that now there's going to be a 5-story huge building just kind of takes away from the reason why I came back. Because this was a small village, beautiful, very picturesque, a lot of beautiful architecture, and now I feel like we're not keeping to those same standards. So I also object to it. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Amy Lester again at 45 Long Common. I guess one thing I want to second to what Diana's saying is it took a really long time for that house to sell in Riverside at a time when people were, snatching up houses. And they bought that house with the intent to come in and build it back up to what, Riverside and the standards used to be. And I feel like, they're investing in making the neighborhood better. And I feel like all these use permits that they want, they're small things that just keep adding up to show that they're trying to get as much money out of the unit as they can. A 750 square foot apartment, making the parking lot, as small as they can, running the fence, directly up to the property line. I just feel, and the same thing now, pointing out that, potentially there could be an underground parking which could keep it at 4 stories. And I just feel that, a lot of people have put a lot of money and effort to make things better. And to me, this is, if you start out nickel and diming something, then how good is your management company really going to be over time to upkeep those units? Or we're going to, over time have the same situation we have on some of the other rental properties. And then the second thing is I do understand that we need more people to live in Riverside and to pay taxes. I would love if this would reduce my taxes, but I think at the same time, we should be following the zoning that was set up with the 4 stories. And I think the 5 stories is just way too much. So, so I'm not opposed to it overall, but they're just trying to jam so much in there. And I mean, are people really going to be able to drive around this corner and drive into those spaces? I mean, Diana and I share a driveway, and we both have trouble staying on that shared driveway. This just seems all like, on paper, it looks like you can do it, but if you actually went out there and started putting things around and tried to drive your car, I think you would find it's actually quite difficult. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Hi, Julie Rizzi, 63 Long Common. I'm opposed to it, too. I think that it's just not going to be right for our town. We've lived here for 43 years, and we like it the way it is right now. And is this going to be a mixed income housing too? I forgot to ask if it was, is this going to be low income housing people too coming into these apartments? Or does anybody know? No. Okay.
No, it's meant to be a luxury market rate apartment building.
So you're not going to have low rents and no Section 8s or anything like that?
No, there's no subsidized
No.
rents. Yeah.
That would be good. That would be good, yeah, right now. But like, again, I'm just opposed to it in general.
My last comment is that I don't see how you could qualify those small units as a luxury apartment building. I mean, if you look at like West Loop Apartments, you know, what did you say, 750 square foot for the one bedroom? I mean, that's minuscule. 750 square feet is like nothing. It is not a luxury square footage unit, and there's a lot of them. How many one bedrooms?
We have 6 one-bedroom units, but only 3 or 4 are 750 square feet.
Well, it is just my opinion that this does not qualify as a luxury building. It has no basement, come on, street-level parking, and it's just not luxury. The size of the units, I think, and I agree about the 5th story also, you know, what's the point? What's the point? The zoning laws are made for the entire population of Riverside. And to change the zoning laws for this building, I feel is totally inappropriate. I mean, you're elected officials to do what the general population wants and what the village needs. And to approve this when it obviously is of no benefit to anybody but the developer is ridiculous. So that's my comment.
Anyone else? All right. Would the petitioner like to respond to any of the comments that were brought up?
No, not at this time.
All right, in that case, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right, is anyone prepared to make a motion concerning the petition, recommending approval, denial, continuance?
Well, I have some questions, perhaps for Planner Siren.
Sure, we can go ahead and do that first.
Is that appropriate? Or perhaps one of the questions I did not ask of the architect is, can you explain more about the ingress and egress for the parking under the under the building, on the first floor of the building?
Yeah, so you would access it through the drive aisle, and then there is an overhead door, so a 2-car width overhead door that you could pull into to access majority of the parking spaces. And then because of the tight conditions, there are additional 2 garage doors that would be just for parking spaces that are right up against the back of the building. So this is just to gain additional parking, but they would be accessed through the back drive.
So how would that work for those additional parking spaces? I mean, people would have first come, first serve for those parking spaces? You couldn't block the entry door?
No, typically, typically the spots are assigned, and the additional parking spaces that you hear could be accessed from the inside of the building. So there's a drive aisle on the inside of the building that's configured like an L. So all those spaces, like if you were just covering all these spaces would be accessed from the interior of the building, and then just these 4 spaces would have direct access to
Okay.
the outside building. So there would be access spaces from both sides to those, yeah.
Okay. And another question, do you know the height of the 4th story of the building? If you stop the building at the 4th story, how tall would it be at that point?
Yeah, let me. So it would be approximately 54 feet if I take 10 feet off of it, because that's about floor to floor height. So I'd say The fifth floor right now is at 49, but you need to add for roof and everything. So I'm just going to say, to be safe, it would be, say, 10 feet shorter, 10 to 11 feet shorter. So it would be 55 feet.
The top of the fourth story would be 55 feet.
The top of the, no, so the top of the roof would be at
Okay.
55 if we were to take,
About 11 feet off, you'd be around
yes.
44 feet.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Right now, the fifth floor is at 49 feet.
Okay.
It's so the occupied part of the fifth floor is at 49 feet, and then the top of the roof is at 64 feet. So the very top of the parapet.
So there's 5 feet between the ceiling of the residential unit on the fifth floor and the top of the roof? There's like a
Yeah,
5
because
foot?
usually, you have the depth of the roof, plus you do a little parapet to, terminate the roof properly. So the roof usually is, at least the top of the parapet is usually a little bit taller than like a typical floor to floor.
So if the, I don't mean to belabor this,
No,
if
no,
the
no.
top of the fifth floor is about 49 feet, then you'd take about 10 feet off of that to get the height of the top of the fourth floor. Is that correct?
No, I'm
No?
sorry, the top of the fifth floor, I meant the floor that you're actually walking on is at 49 feet. So
Okay,
then,
all right.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay,
64 feet.
Yeah, 64
Goes up
feet
to
right there, yeah.
64 feet, and you take off 11 feet, or 10 feet, and you're at 54 feet with a four-story building, which is what you have at 10 East Burlington. Let's not kid ourselves with these numbers, because that's what's happening here.
I'm only asking because if we did not have the 5-story building, if it was a 4-story building, it could be 4 stories or 48 feet in height.
It would be 4 stories and 54, 55 feet, yeah.
It would be limited by the zoning to 48 feet if it's 4
okay.
stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Ann, I had a few questions for you. Perhaps you had some things in the memo, and I had some additional questions. So for the exterior of the facade, the street facade of the building, I think our regulations require that the windows can't be flush. So these are not flush windows.
They have to be punched back.
They are, it looks like they are from the picture, so they are, right?
Yeah.
And then, are the windows considered fixed picture windows? Because the code, again, says, I think, that the front facade windows have to be fixed picture windows or double hung, these obviously aren't that, or casement windows.
Yes, and I
In
apologize.
the B2 building standard.
Right. I reviewed the design standards and confirmed that with the exception of the knee wall, if they want to have retail in the front, that it met all the standards, and I don't remember off the top of my head. I can review
Okay.
the code and answer your question in a second if you give me a second.
That's fine.
Sure.
It's 1057D3, I think.
And I'm sorry, B3?
1057D.
D3?
Yeah.
Sure. And so that says, in order to promote, okay, shall be double hung casement or fixed picture windows with discernible wall elements. Yes, I believe they're fixed picture windows.
Okay.
Yes.
And then you had made a mention about there needing to be wood or wood cladding on the
Yes.
windows. And that's on the front facade and the sides, the corners
Yes.
also?
Yes.
And had you discussed that with the applicant at all, or?
I shared those comments with the applicant, and that's something that we're going to check when we get the building permit. To make sure that those design standards are met, the details.
So it'd be something that could be added later on. It doesn't have to be a condition of,
It doesn't need to be a condition. It can be added. Well, staff can verify that when the building permit is submitted.
okay, it would be understood that those have to be complied with.
Yes.
Okay. And let me see, what else do I have? Also, there's only 3 exterior materials that are approved. It's the stucco and the clad, the brick and the cast stone are the only
Those
three.
are the 3 permitted
Unless we
materials,
specifically
unless-
approve something else like the fiber
Precisely.
cement.
Precisely.
So we would have to include that also?
I believe that the village board and the planning and zoning commission should make a recommendation to the village board, and the village board should approve that as an alternate service, yes.
Okay. Regarding the smallest unit size, 750 square feet, do you know if what other villages around us have for their smallest residential unit? And is something like this a condo or apartment building?
Sure, that's a great question. I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to it.
Okay. I'm just wondering, I mean, I wasn't here when that was added. I don't know how modern that requirement is that, you know, a one-bedroom be at least 900 square feet in size.
I can't speak to the date when that was added. I apologize. I don't know when that was added to the code.
I think that's all I have as a question.
So just to clarify, right now, we're looking for a motion regarding the rezoning only for the northwest portion of the property from the R1A district to the B2 RC district.
Motion to recommend the rezoning of the residential property to commercial.
Can I ask just a procedural question? I want to make sure that whether or not we approve of the rezoning of the additional lot, that has no bearing on our opinion with regard to the second request?
That's
Okay.
correct. They're considered separately.
Is there a second?
I second.
All right. At this time, we should go through the standards for zoning map amendments. There are 12 of these that need to be met. Number one is the existing use and zoning of nearby property. Do we feel that standard has been met?
Yes, I think so.
Number two, the extent to which property values of the subject property are diminished by the existing zoning.
It's more of a use issue.
Number three, the extent to which the proposed amendment promotes the public health, safety, comfort, convenience, and general welfare of the village.
To me, it's sort of neutral on that
I would agree with
condition.
that.
I would not say one way or the other.
Number four, the relative gain to the public as compared to the hardship imposed upon the applicant.
Essentially, there's no real change since the property was previously a parking lot and a garage that was serving the adjacent commercial properties along Burlington.
Number five, the suitability of the property for the purposes for which it is presently zoned, the feasibility of developing the property in question for one or more of the uses permitted under the existing zoning classification.
Right, it doesn't seem to be suitably zoned at this point in time, given its location and size, to me.
And access, or lack thereof.
Number six, the length of time the property in question has been vacant as presently zoned, considered in the context of development in the area where the property is located.
Its previous use actually was not residential.
Right. Number seven, the evidence or lack of evidence of community need for the use proposed by the applicant.
I think that's up for debate.
Yes, if this is developed as a residential use, they will need parking. Number eight, the consistency of the proposed amendment with village plans.
Yeah, I think it's consistent, again, considering the surrounding properties.
Number nine, that the proposed amendment will benefit the residents of the village as a whole, and not just the applicant, property owners, neighbors of any property under consideration, or other special interest groups, and the extent to which the proposed use would be in the public interest, it would not serve solely the interest of the applicant. I think that goes toward it being compatible with the village plans for the downtown area.
I think it's consistent, and again, there's sort of no change for this particular parcel as far as I can see. It's parking garage now, it's going to be continue to be used for parking in just a vacant paved area, not of any particular attractiveness right now or appealing nature, so.
Number 10, the extent to which the proposed amendment creates nonconformities. There would be no nonconformities in this situation. 11, the trend of development, if any, in the general area of the property in question. You can say there is much of a development trend aside
There's
from the
no
build.
development trend. The change in zoning remains consistent with the previous use of the property.
And finally, number 12, whether adequate public facilities are available, including but not limited to schools, parks, police and fire protection, roads, sanitary sewers, storm sewers, and water lines, or are reasonably capable of being provided prior to the development of the uses, which would be permitted on the subject property if the amendment were adopted.
It's not really applicable.
I would agree with that. All right, is there any further discussion?
Just in general, the previous use of the property was a garage and a parking lot. The purpose of the proposed zoning change is to continue to use it as parking, vehicle storage, and then also, should the PUD be approved, that creates a continuous set of properties with no, I'm not thinking the right words here, no split zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rojo. With that, Ann, could you please call the roll?
Sure. Commissioner Pelletier?
Aye.
Commissioner Marvel?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner Braun?
Aye.
Chairperson Hennigan.
Aye. Motion passes. So this is a recommending body, so this recommendation for the rezoning will go towards the village board for final consideration at a future meeting date. Do we know when that meeting date will be yet?
We're not sure yet. I would advise folks to stay tuned and sign up for the Village e-blast.
All right. Now on to the second portion of the discussion, PZ 23-0008, Plan Unit Development for 28 East Burlington Street. This is a public hearing to consider an application from Lion Development 2 LLC for a special use permit for a planned unit development for a mixed-use building, Burlington Street Apartments, with 22 apartments, 2 of which would be live-work units in the B2 RC subdistrict. The requested relief from the standards in the village's zoning ordinance would include the maximum building height, minimum lot area per multifamily dwelling, minimum dwelling unit sizes, minimum width of the parking space and aisles, required landscaping, and such other and additional relief that may be required for the proposed planned unit development that is presented in the above application. Is there a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Sorry, give me a moment here. Yes, notice of the public hearing was published in the Landmark on September 6, 2023, and will be marked as an exhibit. The remaining application materials will be marked as a second exhibit. Is there a motion to accept these exhibits?
So moved.
And a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, at this time, again, if there's anyone who plans to give any testimony, please raise your right hand and be sworn in. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is true to the best of your knowledge? If so, say I do. You do. Ann, can we have a report on this?
Yes. So this application is for the special use of a planned unit development. A planned unit development is a distinct category of special use and with the intention to allow flexibility in the application of the standards in the zoning ordinance. And that's based on procedural protections provided for a detailed review of individual significant proposals that are in the public interest and provide a public benefit. So the applicant, as we know, is proposing to combine the subject parcels into a single property and redevelop the property into a mixed-use multifamily apartment building. Again, there's 22 residential units, including the 2 ground floor live-work units. It's a 5-story building at 64 feet tall. The Planning and Zoning Commission reviewed the concept plans for this PUD on April 26, 2023, and provided feedback on the application, which is in the packet in attachment B. The changes to the plan since that conceptual review are listed on the second page of the memo, which is page 49 in the packet. The exceptions from district regulations are listed on page 2 of the memo. The 2 main changes that I want to point out from the previous review that we've already discussed is that 6 of the units do not meet the required minimum dwelling size, and the surface parking spaces now meet the 9-foot required width, but the spaces under the building are still 8 feet 6 inches. The proposed development meets the other regulations for the B2 district, aside from the light intensity at the residential property lines. Per section 1072B in the code, the light intensity, shall not exceed 1/10 of a foot candle as measured at any residential property line. So that's a recommended condition of the approval would be that the lighting plan is updated to make sure that those light standards are not, or light limits are not exceeded. I want to mention the flexibility that John touched on in his presentation before regarding, and just to clarify, I think we've got it, but I just want to clarify. So to have a residential use on the ground floor in this district requires a special use. So if the live-work unit can't be leased and they would just like to have a residential unit, that would be approved as part of the special use in the application. So if the PZC recommends that as part of the special use, please consider that as part of your consideration. The other recommendation, or the other point that John mentioned, is using that space just for retail. To use a space just for retail, to have a retail space in the B2 unit, you have to have a knee wall. Currently, the architectural renderings do not show a knee wall on the front of the building, and the applicant and John have agreed that they would add that to the rendering. So that rendering would be updated before the village board meeting so that you would see what that would look like. The village, again, just I want to note the letter and email that we received in opposition to the development as part of the packet. We didn't receive any other feedback on the application before this meeting. If the commission recommends approval of the application, staff recommends several conditions which are listed on page 3 of the memo. So the commission is requested to make 2 recommendations on this application. One is whether the board should grant exceptions to the district regulations that were listed in the memo. The commission should consider the standards, including the design characteristics and amenities that are considered public benefits in attachment C when reviewing the exceptions to the district regulations. The second recommendation is whether to approve the special use for planned unit development, and the standards for those are included in attachment C of the packet. So you'll have 2 reviews. And again, the village board will consider your recommendation along with your recommendation for the rezoning at an upcoming meeting. If the rezoning and preliminary site plan are approved, the applicant will prepare a final site plan for the village board's review and approval. And I'd like Village Attorney Pickerel to discuss the public benefits, since this is a new concept for us here in the village.
So every planned unit development is required to have a public benefit, and that really has 2 components pursuant to the village code. The first component is that the planned unit developments are not solely for the benefit of the applicant or the developer, that they have to confer some level of benefit on the public generally. And that is something that's usually found in the form of economic development. And that's what they've described in their application, which is that this will draw people to the area and stimulate business and generate tax revenue. That's a generalized public benefit. Additionally, the village code identifies a number of specific public benefits in the form of architectural designs and features that are requested to be on the property. There's a non-exhaustive list of these in section 1013.5B. These types of physical features include enhanced landscaping, various assistance for senior citizens. Another ones are facilities that will enhance environmental protection, things of that nature. These are the village code identifies a list of benefits. It's not exhaustive. It is really for the board and for the plan commission and later the village board to decide if the design is such that it would benefit the public. I would note that here, as I said, there are specific benefits that are identified are enhanced landscaping, environments, and matters which might help the elderly. And I know as part of this application, you described certain landscape enhancements, an elevator, which would be helpful people with physical limitations, an EV charging station, and pervious pavers. So those are of the type of things we would consider whether there's a sufficient public benefit.
Thank you very much. I didn't have any further comments unless you have any questions for me or for Bob. I would ask the applicant, the applicant's representatives if they'd like to make a presentation.
I went through the project in the previous discussion. So if you guys have any questions, I'll take those, but I have nothing further. Thank you.
All right, does anyone have any questions for the petitioner? All right. Any,
Well,
oh,
I
I'm
have a
sorry,
question.
yes. Sorry, I forgot about everyone.
That's good. It just occurred to me. Did you do any calculations regarding having an excavated parking garage under the building and then having 4 floors of residential?
I think that's, the size of the site is prohibitive to an underground parking, just because you need to meet certain parking ramp requirements. So if you need to go down 10 feet, and we only have, realistically, 114 feet, that's a pretty steep slope to go down, and that really eats up a lot of the building footprint, so it's not as efficient to go underground in a small site like this. Just because the parking, the ramp itself takes up a lot of space, and then you need a lot of actual ramp run to get down 10 feet or whatever you need to get the parking to fit.
Okay, but do you have any?
We haven't done.
Plans? You didn't do any
We haven't
mock-ups,
done a
nothing
study,
like
I guess,
that?
yeah. I think it was just something we talked about, and it was like, I think it's going to be prohibitive because of this, but we don't have concrete plans, I guess.
And are you familiar at all with the adjacent building that does have underground parking and the size of that underground parking? I'm not. I don't know anything
I'm
about
not
it.
either, yeah. I'm not sure how that works, how that building works.
Any other questions from the commission?
I have one question for Anne, or anyone who knows the answer. What is the height of the water tower?
Oh, gosh.
I can Google it.
I know the height of the former water tower. I did not find in my Google search the height of the current water tower. Before the fire, it was 108 feet. And I know that, I apologize, I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, before the fire, it's 108 feet. They added probably 20 to 30 feet to build the new tank above that.
So it's
I'm guessing, but that's,
over 100 feet at least.
we know it's at least over, say, 120 feet.
I thought there was, at one of the village board meetings, there was a discussion about that very subject, and there was some question as to whether approving, was it either 5 stories or 6 stories, would exceed the height of the water tower, though. So I don't know, I just don't.
I know, and I remember the discussion. I remember thinking, I need to remember this number, and then, of course, I cannot remember the number. I apologize.
Google did not yield a reliable answer.
Same. I was not able to find a reliable number.
I got 3 answers, and so I don't know either.
Any other questions from the commission? All right. Any questions or comments from members of the audience?
Again, Steve Rotuno, 10 East Burlington, Unit 4D. Your question about underground parking at 10 East Burlington, there are 38 spots underground. They're talking about 19 here. I think the fact that they didn't do an analysis of what it would cost to dig it underground is problematic for the commission to approve this without knowing that, because it's not unfeasible to do that, to do underground parking at this space. The 10 East Burlington Street property is probably about a third longer in width from east to west than this spot. So this should not be a problem doing underground with 19 parking spots. And they can ask for a variance because they're very good at asking for variances for a number of other things. They can ask for a variance if there's an issue on the length of the driveway. And if you follow the code, they could build 22 units, underground parking, 4 stories, okay? You wouldn't have to change the code. You wouldn't have to worry about any other developer saying, we want the same thing, really ruining the picture of the downtown and what it's supposed to be. The other thing that I find troubling is this issue about, we're talking about height of the water tower. The water tower has always been higher than any building proposed. That issue is people throw that out. That's a red herring. There's no issue about the height of the water tower. It's what the regulations that the town has approved after careful consideration over many years, and they say you can only have, what, 55 feet, 54 feet, whatever that is. A 4-story building here would fit within that. All you have to do is put the underground parking. You have a spot for every unit. So this is for the convenience of the developer. There's no benefit to the town or anybody in the town to allow a 5-story building. This is solely for the convenience of the developer to save him money. And so if you approve this, that's what you're doing. You're disregarding what this village spent years doing with their planning and what the regulation should be. The second thing that is problematic is allowing rental. There's been no evidence that this town needs more rental units. None. There was nothing in the packet you got that I saw, and there's nothing in the proposal today. Why do we need a rental? Make this a condominium and see where it goes. If you're going to approve a 4-story building, it should be condominium ownership. That's what this town has been built on, and there's been no evidence that there's any need for rental. None. Zero. Again, that is for the convenience of the developer solely, and you're missing what people here have said, and I hope everybody will stand up. And these people here are all from, most of them from 10 East Burlington. We're all opposed to this. I'm not their spokesman, but you should all get up and tell this board exactly how you feel. So when the formal board looks at this, they can see that there are a number of people who are upset with this. Thank you.
Mike Gustafson, 10 East Burlington Street, 2H. If I'm correct, I believe that this building was started in 2008, and basically Pat inherited this building through receivership, I believe. So therefore, the case may be made, it went bankrupt in a receivership, so we can't compare to what the market was back then to the future tenants. Maybe you can't afford underground parking, I don't know. So, I mean, as far as this market going forward, I mean, if I believe in the way it was before at 10 East, we bought our place from Lion Properties, and it was a rental before that, plus a lot of other places. So I think as far as the size-wise, I have no, whatever people want to buy or rent, it's up to them. But I think that, long-term, just going into this market, just to get something built, as long as we can find some common ground as far as specifications, I think it would be a win-win for everybody as long as we do it right. So, thanks.
Anyone else like to speak? All right. There's no further public comments. Could I get a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Do you have any discussion on the proposed plan unit development and exceptions?
I think the first thing to note is that the rules that we're discussing were actually recommended by this body and approved by the village board without reference to the development that's in front of us. This was part of the transit-oriented development zoning change that applied to some properties along Harlem as well as portions of Burlington. And this was, as I just noted, in the name, it was specifically to increase or enhance use of property in the vicinity of mass transit options, i.e. get away from a car-centric property use.
I would like to note that there's also a safeguards and a procedure with regard to whether or not certain properties fall into that category.
Well, it's been requested that we make two separate recommendations. One regarding the exceptions that are requested, that being the building height, minimum dwelling unit size, parking aisle widths, parking space widths, and perimeter parking lot landscaping. Do you have any specific feelings on those?
The way I look at it, we're being asked, I don't know if this is the wrong way around to do it, but we're being asked to recommend a planned unit development that needs to have certain public benefits. And I don't feel that I have a good sense of what those public benefits are. I would like some kind of a list of what they are, that we can see them and we can sort of assess them and not have them just generally sort of discussed. So.
Is our analysis first to, and I'm not putting it out there as an opinion, I'm asking the commissioners their opinion on how to go about analyzing this. Is our analysis first to determine whether or not this project is a planned, should be approved as a planned unit development, and then look at the special use permits? I mean, I think it's all laid out for us in the zoning. I think we have to look at the approval standards for planned unit developments and perhaps go through these questions.
That's basically correct. A planned unit development is just a type of special use. And so you're viewing it in terms of a cohesive, there's greater flexibility allowed with what you can do because you have a specific development provided to you, and there's level of procedures, and after this would be a preliminary plan and a final plan. So yes, what you've been given is a series of standards to see whether or not it satisfies those standards, including whether there's a sufficient public benefit. And if you are unclear as to the level of public benefit, or you like greater specificity, this hearing can be continued to request that information. Alternatively, if you feel you have that enough information, we would go through the standards for a special use, which I believe you have in front of you, and then additionally the standards for a planned unit development. And if the extent to which it satisfies those standards will govern whether you're willing to grant the relief which is being requested, variations to height and various other relief from the zoning code.
So something could be determined a planned unit development, but we don't necessarily have to approve all of the requests.
Correct.
And you said that we'd look at the special use requirements first and then?
You have to look at it all, yes. So there's standards in section 10.13.7 that are specific to planned unit developments, and those standards include that you have to pass the standards for a special use permit. So I think you have a total of 7 plus 5 there. 12 standards.
Right, okay.
Although you'll see when you talk to these special use permit standards, standards 1 and 2 have limited applicability because it asks, will it comply with all the regulations in the district? We're granting, if approved, we'll grant deviations from those standards. So there's a bit of a play in the gears there.
Would you like to go through the standards for plan developments and then go through the exceptions afterwards?
I think that makes
Okay.
sense.
All right. Well, starting with these standards for plan developments. Except as modified and approved in the final plan, the proposed planned unit development complies with the regulations of the district in which it is to be located. That's what our attorney just explained that we'd be dealing with here.
Right.
Number two, the principal use in the plan development is consistent with any land use policies, plans, or studies approved or adopted by the village, the character of the village, and the village's historic landmark designation. It's very consistent with our transit-oriented developments ordinance changes.
Well, I think in this instance, to me, the issue here of whether this would be a condominium or rental building might enter into this standard, and I don't feel I have enough information to know how to assess that difference in character, and I'm not sure that our code even addresses that difference in character between two different kinds of residential forms of ownership.
I don't believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe ownership is addressed in the zoning ordinance.
No, it's not.
I don't see how the difference between ownership or rental impacts, the nature of the village or the historic landmark status.
I think in the packet, there was a reference to the fact that that Ann and your team looked at the landmark status and whether or not 5-story buildings down Burlington would affect that. And I think the jury was still out on that, or they?
Sure. So the historic landmark designation is not based on one site, was the advice that we received from the State Historic Preservation Office. So unlike a historic building or a different type of designation, the configuration of the village is the primary driver behind the designation. So the advice they gave was one site will not affect your historic landmark designation. They said theoretically, if the entire downtown area were redeveloped with 5-story buildings, that could speak to a change in the character of the village, but that still isn't determinative of a change to that designation. So I know that's not satisfying as a clear yes or no answer, but that's the advice that we received.
But it might? Did you get the
If all
impression that
of,
it might?
one building would not change, that was the answer that we got. That was the most definitive response that I got, was one development is not going to affect the historic landmark designation status. Again, if you saw an entire wholesale redevelopment of the entire downtown area, full of different types of buildings, that might speak to the character, which might affect the designation, but again, that would be many developments was what I was told over, and again, of course, that's going to take place over time.
We could consider recommending that it go before preservation if that makes.
Well, it can't now because we.
It can, I think. It's not required to, but we can recommend.
Oh, we can require?
Yeah,
Okay. We could recommend?
yeah, I should think.
I thought since we made that lot in the business
Commercial.
district, it's commercial, it's no longer in front of the
Required.
preservation.
Yeah.
Let me check. 'Cause I believe correct me if I'm wrong, that the preservation only considers
They
outside the.
consider residential. Now, that's
Right.
not to say you can't request their input. It's
Okay.
just not required as part of the process. That was the distinction that I was trying to make in the
Thank you.
memo.
To go back to the rental versus ownership, when we think of the village as a whole, the village does have a number of rental units, primarily along Forest, along Harlem, a number of the buildings along, and I don't know how many are owner versus rental occupied, but a number along Burlington, correct? Help me out. A lot of the duplexes.
Yes.
But whether or not this is a rental building or owner occupied is not going to be a significant change to the overall character of the village.
I guess I have another question. If this building were limited to 4 stories, would we be having a conversation regarding whether or not this is a planned unit development? I know that there are some special requests, but if it was 4 stories, would we be having this conversation about a planned unit development? Or would it be?
I believe we would, because we're considering the site, the 4 properties as a whole. It's more than just the height that we're looking at. We're looking, as Chairperson Hennigan already noted, we're looking at height, minimum dwelling size, parking aisle widths, parking space widths, the perimeter landscaping, lighting, et cetera.
Now, all of those could be handled through a variation, though.
But they are in a planned unit development, we get to consider them as a group.
Oh, sure, but
That's
theoretically,
the whole
yeah.
point of the
Yes.
planned unit development, is to assess this as a grand scheme rather than trying to pick apart individual elements.
Sure.
But I think practically the fact that it's 5 stories is what's driven it to be a PUD application. If it was a large piece of property and it didn't have to be 5 stories to make it feasible, maybe we wouldn't be facing this, but it's a small piece of property. So that's my impression. So I don't know, going back to the issue, just ownership versus rental, I understand, I am on the fence about this. I don't know the right answer, but I do know that we moved here right after the village center issue. So we didn't really live through that, but we lived here after. And I know that there was issues with, filling the building. And I'm just wondering, we're not developers. We're not supposed to be developers. But given the character of the village, I just don't, maybe this is something for the board to consider more. How do those different forms of ownership impact the occupancy of the building? That's what I'm thinking of. And I assume that the developer thinks he knows the best way to fill those spaces.
The developer, we can assume, is proposing a certain scheme, meaning rentals, because that will sell and bring him a profit. That's why you develop a building, that's why you spend the capital. I'm still going to hold back to my original statement, which is this village is not made of simply owner-occupied units. We have a substantial number of rental units. They are varying sizes and they are varying quality.
Yes, and we just recently had new regulations put in because those large rental buildings were not always being maintained properly. And maybe going forward, this one, if this had to comply with those new rules and not be retrofitted and all the rest, it wouldn't be an issue.
Correct, and that's a landlord issue and not an issue of the people who are occupying the units.
Yes.
These standards for planned developments talk about the use of the property and the use of the building. The zoning ordinance doesn't consider ownership as a different type of use. The use is for a multifamily property. So I think that's what we need to consider when considering, does this meet the standard or not?
Right, and I think that's an excellent point to bring up as well. And before, and I see I don't want to guide the course of the conversation. If at some point we were considering whether or not to add a condition, about the nature of the ownership, this is a active and evolving area of law. The extent to which we are authorized to regulate ownership, can we require ownership versus leasing or renting? And so if at some point that is the decision, which I don't know if it will or won't be, I would ask the ability to double check to make sure that we are authorized to make that sort of condition if that is something people are interested in. If it's not, then my point is moot.
Just a point, in the rezoning memo, page 14 in your packet, there are notes about the Village of Riverside Central Business District Plan. Point 1.9 is to continue the support of multifamily buildings. And the last statement of that plan, which again, this is a plan for the Central Business District or for the village, is to support multifamily buildings. It says, over the long term, the village should continue its support of new residential construction in the form of mixed-use buildings or multifamily apartments and condominiums. So the plan does support both apartments and condominiums, which would suggest either style of ownership in the Central Business District.
And the live-work unit, that's something that we recently approved as part of the TOD for the ground floor, is that true? That it doesn't need a special use or anything?
The live work does not need a special use, that's correct. But as a solely residential use on the ground floor, it would need that special use.
Right, okay.
Well, I feel, given the excerpt from the town center plan that we just heard, I do feel that that standard number 2 is meant that the principal use is consistent with our land use policy plans and studies. So unless there's any objection, can we move on to standard number 3 for the plan
No
unit developments?
objection.
That the proposed plan unit development is in the public interest and is consistent with the purposes and objectives of the zoning ordinance and in this chapter.
I take exception with proposed, but the fact that there's a development there, I have no objection to. I just don't want to necessarily agree with all of the requests that they've made. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And I again feel here that we don't have enough in front of us. We don't have enough commitments. I mean, there's discussion about, well, it could be a lead building, it could be all electric, it could be this, it could be that, but we don't have any, so I'm having trouble identifying the definitive, identifiable public benefits and environmental benefits that would come with this building, because it seems like it's still a work in progress. So I don't think I could determine whether that it is or is not in the public interest as a PUD.
So to your point, you'd like to see more information on the specific benefits and potentially the economic benefits, say what property taxes are accessible on a rental building.
Yes, I suppose so, but also just
When we start talking
about.
economics of a residential building, it's really all about taxes versus required services.
Right, so in connection with that, I think that it's possible that some of the things that are said, that the owner is considering doing this or is considering that, might go by the wayside if it's determined that the rental income is not going to be sufficient. And I'd be interested in the issue of, serious consideration of putting in underground parking. Is that really impractical, or is it not? And maybe the proposal here was, well, we just sort of thought about it, and it is totally impractical, and it can't be done, but I don't know that we have I can't make that determination, other than just taking it in good faith. So issues like that. But there is a paragraph or two in the proposal where, again, it says things like, well, we're considering all electric, we're considering this, we're considering it to be a highly efficient sealed envelope and all the rest, but there's no commitment to doing any of that, as far as I can tell. And I think those are, because it's a small property, there's not going to be a public park established. There are other obvious public benefits. And so the benefits both to the tenants in money savings and for utilities and things like that, and general societal benefit of having high-efficiency appliances and methods of construction and perhaps low-carbon materials or other things. I would like to just know whether those are going to be part of the project or are not, or possibly if some condition is met. That's what I'd like to see. And if it wasn't going to be a 5-story building, I would have maybe less concern about that. But
Your point's good. To be perfectly honest, a number of these features are inevitable because you can't buy incandescent lighting anymore, so they're gonna have LED. They're going to, we know we already have the daylighting, but I understand what you're saying. There's a number of these that are potentially still up for question.
right. Is the high-efficiency heating system really the best? You know, would there be better heating systems that could be? I just, those are just, I know it's at a preliminary stage, but I just feel like it's possible that there are some suggestions of something that could happen, but then in the end, they won't happen. And we've already approved a 5-story building, the only one in the village.
Can we make them conditions of the approval?
Well, I don't know if we can, because we're not here, we're not planning, we're not builders, we're not developers. I would rather the developer propose them and say, this, we will do this, or an equivalent, not, that's what I'm thinking.
I think a number of these are already included by design, like the bicycle parking, the green roofs, separate trash and recycling. So some of those, like you said, are construction details.
Right. Well, for instance, I have limited knowledge of this, but with windows, there are different efficiency windows and based on different materials. And my understanding is aluminum is the best. Aluminum cladding is the best. It's the most efficient, but the proposal was for vinyl windows. So that makes me wonder, about the commitment to high efficiency. Just those kinds of issues that would be for someone, perhaps in our building department or civil engineer or someone to look at.
Do we, seeing as this looks like it's going to get continued, do we need a list of additional questions that the developer would need to be able to present to us to add to our assurance? It's not quite the right word, but our confidence that we're getting the best possible public benefit, rather than perhaps what might be a somewhat loose commitment to some of these concepts.
I think that would be an excellent idea. Since I myself have been struggling with the public benefit requirement, and if that has been met in this case, I would like to see more detailed information on specifically what public benefits in the developer's view are being provided. I asked for that the first time we looked at this sort of preliminarily a few months ago, and I didn't really see a whole lot done to address that. Keeping in mind, we want to see specifics. How will this be a benefit not only to the residents of the building, to the developer, but also to residents of Riverside in general, the neighborhood in general?
So I have a question. So like, for example, one of the things we said is like the enhanced landscaping is a benefit, it's a public benefit. Right now it's an empty lot. We're enhancing that landscape.
So what would you be doing
besides, I
above
guess,
and
so
beyond
we
code?
have that, we have a landscape plan. I guess beyond that, what would you like to see? So we kind of, when we generate this list, we understand like the very specifics that you're looking for.
So we do have a list within our ordinance of different types of public benefits. So that would be a great starting point to go through, say, are you meeting, 1, 2, 7, and 9 of the list, and how are you meeting those?
Right. And that's section 1013.5B lists, it's a non-exhaustive list. It lists the types of things that we consider to be public benefits.
Okay.
So if you find something in that general categories, you let that guide your thinking.
When we talk, an example would be if we're talking about economic benefits, not a research paper, but a discussion about what the potential property taxes look like. That could be some analysis that's based on existing rental units versus square footage. Obviously, you'd have to consider the intended property being fancier, higher end versus, lower end properties. So something that addresses that. It can't just be a bunch of numbers thrown at the wall. Typically, we've addressed something in terms of parking. I know you said typical parking for multifamily is 1.5 to 1.75 parking spaces per unit. How many kids do we make a guess that this is going to add to the school district, perhaps? Because that's a cost to the town. When I say a cost, property taxes, school children, there's a pretty direct relationship there. You can think of others as well.
I mean, when I look at the list of in B, to me, there's very few things that this property could really satisfy. Again, I can't do public parks, I can't do dog park or things like that. So I focus more on like number 3 and number 4, which is reducing the impervious surfaces and the use of green building and sustainable development techniques, particularly that one. Because if the property is right now not creating a problem as far as stormwater, then I don't know there'd be any benefit to putting in more permeable surfaces like porous asphalt or things like that for the drive lanes. But if you're talking about using low carbon materials or again, energy efficiency, some showing that this is very efficient. We're using the most efficient appliances. We've done an assessment of that. And because appliances are going to last maybe now for 10 years, but they're a long-term thing and every person who lives there is going to use. So that's what I would be, I think, where the applicant could go. That's my opinion, just because of, again, the size of this building.
And I think some elements of that have been answered, and we know that we've seen an increase in permeable surface over what was originally proposed.
Right, and it would seem like that has been sufficiently satisfied from what I can tell. But I think the Village of
curious.
Riverside is interested in perhaps, becoming more sensitive to greenhouse gas emissions and to things like that. And again, just the quality of the building for whoever lives there, whoever either buys or rents there, the quality of the materials and the energy efficiency of the envelope of the building, those things.
Anything else we'd like to see from the petitioner when they come back before us?
Just to confirm, I want to make sure that I'd like to explore underground parking and perhaps more exact measurements and whether or not that could be done.
Okay.
And if not, why?
And
Thank you.
I would like to understand the need for the variation in the size of the unit, if it's possible to eliminate that. Would you need the 750?
Honestly, say this here, when I first was dating a certain young lady, I know that she was living in a 600 square foot unit on Lincoln Avenue, and it certainly was not
I have lived in one myself that size, so
Inadequate
I'm not
unit.
saying, I'm just, it's a variation to our requirements, and I would like to understand, if that's necessary.
All right, anything else? In that case, is there a motion?
to continue after we've got some additional details fleshed out by the petitioner. So moved.
Second?
I second.
we're making, we're to continue this hearing to, we should assign a date to that, generally speaking? So is
The
there,
October 25th meeting?
Can we ask a question of petitioner first?
sure?
Can you will a month be sufficient to get us sufficient detail?
Yeah, yeah.
So, John, the application, the material, I would need to have the materials from you by Monday, October 16th.
That might be aggressive.
Okay.
Because Pat's out of town, so I won't be able to get to
Okay.
it. So maybe that's aggressive. Let's push it maybe to the following.
Are you comfortable with the November 29th meeting, which is the
That's, yes.
Planning and Zoning Commission meeting?
You said that was November 29th?
29th, yes.
So the motion.
Please add that to my motion, to continue this to the November Planning and Zoning Commission meeting.
Does the second agree on that?
A second, yes.
Ann, please call the roll.
Commissioner Pelletier?
Aye.
Commissioner Marhold?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Braun?
Aye.
Chairperson Hennigan?
Aye. The motion passes to continue to the November 29th meeting for further discussion. Thank you, everyone. We have no old business. Any additional information from any commissioners?
Just that we will have a meeting in October, so stay tuned for information, and if you could just let me know if you can attend.
I cannot.
I know Commissioner Pelletier, you won't be able to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So next meeting is October 25th. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Meeting is adjourned.